You're listening to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller. This episode is free to access. This podcast is here for women who are in the middle of life, who are holding a lot and running on empty. They're ready for something to shift, but they don't know where to start. If that's you, start with my free 5-minute What's Next for Me check-in. It'll help you pinpoint what's keeping you stuck and what to focus on first. You'll find it in the show notes. In this fantastic episode, I'm joined by two guests, Lizzie Miller and Emma Windmill, who are both qualified play therapists. And we have a fantastic conversation around the role of play as adults. And I honestly really recommend you dig into this and get the golden wisdom from their experiences. It's time for a bit of play. I am so excited to have this conversation with you two. I've got two expert play therapists in the room who happen to be family and friend, like family. So we're going to have a great conversation together today, which I know is going to mean loads to the people who listen to this podcast, because the concept of play is something that we talk about all the time when our children are little. We're talking about, let's play, let's do this. And then play just seems to become a topic then that is just about being little and not something we talk about as an adult. So my first question for you, Lizzie, you go first. If you were to say the word play in a room of adults, what do you expect, especially if these are tired adults, you know, busy, middle of life, parents relying on them, children relying on them, careers that they're doing? What do you notice happens when you talk about play or inject that into the conversation?
Well, I guess a bit like you're saying, it tends to become about their children, if they've got children, or about children that they know. And I think, I think people think about play and think of their children and how to keep them entertained. Yeah. Like, whilst I'm doing something else, that's what they'll do.
Yeah, they'll play, play.
Yeah. And I think when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, I think a lot of it's to do with not being able to define what play is. Like, they don't really understand. So they do think it's about their children. But they don't, there's a lot more to it than that, and they probably just don't really know what play actually
is. And I'd like you to tell me what play is in a minute, but before I do, Emma, what do you think when you think about conversations you've had with adults about play?
I think lots of people think about their childhood, and actually think about what they did as a child, but dismiss it. So I think
that season's over.
Yeah. That's for then, and so therefore define it quite childishly. And so I think actually people get really excited by it, but in a very much that was for then, and it's nostalgia or play. That's not for me.
Yeah. If I think about myself and I think around the word, if I think about the word play, I think sometimes it can just make me feel a little bit sad that there isn't enough play in life. And when I think I'm quite a playful person, and I can think, when do I get to just be a person that's being playful or having play in my life? So coming back to that point then, how would both of you, I'm sure you've got proper definitions, but how would you define play so that we don't just think of Play-Doh or Happy Land or whatever it is that it was for your children, cars? What's play? What is the definition of play? Do you want to go first, Emma?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's actually really hard to define because you don't want to stick it in a box, because the whole thing around play is it's a creative thing, and so actually it's something to play with. But there's a really good book by this guy called Stuart Brown, and he tried to put some parameters around it, and some of the things he said were that it is something that you do for its own sake. So you're not doing it for, if you're running but you're doing a marathon, it's very different from I'm going for a run because I really enjoy running.
Right.
It's voluntary, you do it because you want to. It's inherently fun. But one thing that I really love about when we think about plays, there's a freedom from time. So when we think about things that actually we find fun and playful, often, I know I find this, that I will go, it's 4:00 already, I thought it was midday. And it's because I've done something that's play for me and then just lost track of time.
That's
and
really
then
good.
Another one that I think is really helpful is that there's a diminished consciousness of self. So we forget the things that we might worry about in our appearance or how we come across, and we just go for it. And I really love that one. And then last couple is it's improvisational, so you can kind of be creative. So there's not a defined way of doing things. And a real desire to continue. So those are the parameters he puts around, which gives a really broad definition. But I think it's really helpful for us to think about when we think there'll be something that might be playful for one person, not for another, but those are some of the definitions that might be helpful to think about.
Could you argue then that if I wanted to clean out the fridge, but I was doing it because I wanted to, and I was not thinking about time or feeling under pressure, and I enjoyed it, can that be play, or is that not play? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it could. I was going to say something that I was.
No, that's a bit of a
cleaning your fridge.
Cleaning out the fridge. But no, the reason
definitely.
sometimes that feels like a chore, and other times I just think I'm pottering, and I felt like doing it.
Yeah.
And it can feel quite different.
Yeah, and
that's
I think
why I chose that.
some people say that play is a state of mind and like a way of being, isn't it? It's not about a specific activity, but it's about how you approach something. So this, like Emma was saying about the running, you can do running in different ways, couldn't you? So running with like it's just got real purpose, and I have to achieve something, and that's maybe a bit different than being running just for the sheer enjoyment of it and the pleasure of it. And I guess if you find enjoyment and pleasure clearing out your fridge and organising, or
Sure.
I guess you could call that being playful.
Is play different to having a hobby?
That's a great question.
A really good question. I would say that having a hobby can be play. So riding your bike. I know my husband loves riding his bike, and for him most of the time it is play. It is having a hobby because he finds it fun, because he will go and forget about what else is going on in his life and have that freedom from time, freedom from responsibility, and it becomes play for him. So I think hobbies are really naturally integrated with play.
Yeah, and I suppose it's play encompasses a hobby, but it's much more than that. Like we were talking earlier about, you can play with words, you can play cleaning out your fridge, you can be playful in lots of different ways, can't you? And that might include your hobby.
So some of it is about this state of mind that you've said, that it's actually not just the thing that you're doing. But I guess I'm also wondering, why do I feel then, if I'm just to get your thoughts on this, if I've got some hobbies, I mean, they are minimal and very simple, like walking the dog is a hobby. Or,
it's a good hobby.
Yeah. Or seeing a friend. Like, those are probably my main hobbies. I don't shop for hobby. I don't cook for hobby. But why do I then maybe sometimes think, and even if we use the example of Andy likes cycling or Sam likes whatever he likes to do, or you go to the gym or whatever it is you do, why might we feel a bit of wistfulness then about the concept of play if we have a hobby? So I'm thinking of some of the people that are listening to this. They probably do things like run. They probably do fit in some of those kind of activities. Why is it then that if I actually stop and engage with the idea of play, I do still feel there's a bit of a lack?
See, I think so. As Emma said, like Stuart Brown, who he's Dr. Stuart Brown, isn't he? He started the National Institute for Play in America. So he spent like all his career researching and like the science around play. So he defines play, like Emma was saying. But I was also looking at the Michael Rosen. So the author Michael Rosen. He's written a book about play, and he talks about play similar to what Stuart Brown says, but he also talks about it being an opportunity where there's no fear of failure. Right. So, and I think that's broader, isn't it then? Because that's about creativity and a space to actually have a go at something, explore, change, and I think maybe sometimes hobbies, they can also become like a task, and they have to have a certain outcome maybe, or at the end of this thing, I've got to have made this thing, or I've got to have run this marathon, or I've got to have done this many miles, or whatever it is. They might have goals, whereas I think thinking about play as an opportunity to be creative and there not be a set outcome, and there be an opportunity to make mistakes and fail and kind of get, play around with something.
So it is potentially more than just leisure and more than rest and more than entertainment. There's something a little bit different to it. And
it's got to be really, you've got to enjoy it. And if maybe you've set yourself a goal and it starts to become a bit like, that's one of the things they say, is that it has to be enjoyable. Of course, there's got to be pleasure in playing. And when there's not that anymore, it doesn't become that. It becomes some duty. And so maybe sometimes
it's doing it without that.
Yeah.
So there's an element of, if we're thinking about play as adults, it is perhaps, it can be expressed through hobbies, but it is a bit more than that. It is, I like this idea of the timelessness, or the no time bound and no goal and doing it for the sake of it, because I think that's a really interesting point, is just as a wider point. As adults, how often do we do things just because even if you use the cleaning out the fridge, it could be enjoyable, but is it really play? Because there's a reason why I'm doing it. I don't just clean out the fridge like...
And you know there's going to be an outcome.
There's
You're going to have a nice tidy fridge.
But but when you think about play as children, I guess I'm just remembering what play looked like. And yes, of course, there might be some things you build. You might build Lego, but actually there's no defined beginning or end to a play. There's no sort of like, oh, play has finished. You know, you could carry on. You could continue to be in make-believe or continue to colour or whatever it is that you're doing in the type of play. You know, my children used to get the cars out or build something with Lego or get the Happy Land out and build a little pretend whole world. There's no defined beginning or end to that or any reason for doing it.
Yeah.
There's no reason.
No.
Like nothing happens
No.
at the end.
No.
I think that we are adults and therefore we have responsibilities and we have things that we need to do. And I would never, and I don't live a life where I can just do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. And so therefore, you know, there is a period of childhood where that more or less happens at different times, you know. And so I think back and the mud pies and the this and the that for days, you know, in the holidays of like being outside
making
and
perfume
just
with flowers and
oh
water.
gosh, I did that. I loved it and I tried to sell it and never made a penny. But, you know, it was so fun. The rose perfume. And you just, you know, I'm not going to sit there as an adult at my door with rose petal perfume and trying to sell it for £1 or whatever. That's just not going to work, and that would be really embarrassing and weird. But there is something that, you know, as a child, they talk about in play therapy. I can't remember who says it, but play is the child's language and the brain's language. And so the way that children are kind of responding and reacting is actually before language, verbally, they are playing and they like all the neural pathways are lighting up and they're learning and they're exploring and they're taking risks and they're learning what it looks like to socialize and if I do this and I do this and what happens and oh look, here's a thing. And you know, it's something about childhood that is really, really precious that we come out of. But I think what ends up happening is we become quite restricted. And so hobbies or play becomes this sort of boxed thing of like, oh, I can play now. Or I can go and ride my bike or I will go for that run. But there's that half an hour window that I can do it in. And I think one of the things that I definitely am trying to build in, and I have to really think about it because life is full and it's really easy to just become quite serious quite quickly and stay in that place, is to think about, well, how can I make something playful? How can something not just be task orientated, but how could I make it into something where I don't have to be perfect and actually I can just play with something a little bit, even if it is something that I do have to do, you know. So playful attitude.
Yeah, I guess if you take your fridge example, I was just thinking about that when you were saying it, Emma, and I was thinking, you know, you could be exploring how to, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but playfully, like, what can I do in my fridge? How can I make it different? I'm just playing around. I'm not like, And so it could be different, I guess, in how you approach something. And that's what children do, isn't it? They like, how could this be different? You know, with your cars, the kids with the cars and setting it up and the track and seeing what happens if they do this or do that and trying. So I think part of play is like, it's about exploration, isn't it? And creativity, and those are things that as adults, as you said, like we want to
keep doing, but we don't always. And I guess I was thinking as I was listening to you, there is a child inside each of us that sometimes I think when you've got a little child, there's an access point back. And I was just reflecting as I'm listening, you know, when the children were little, I didn't always want to do it, and there were loads of times when they wanted to play and I'm like, I don't really want to play and I've got things to do, but you would, and you'd engage in playing some things. Sometimes it'd be really easy, wouldn't it? And you were like, oh, this was a fun bit of time. And other times you've just thought, oh gosh, I just really don't want to be playing right now. But then you move into a life stage where your access to play slows down for lots of people, unless you work with children. I mean, I used to be in year one sometimes, and year one's really interesting because year one is when the children just spend their entire time saying to you, when can we play?
Yeah.
That's the
'Cause
phrase
they
of
miss
year
it
one.
from reception.
It's like you're
Yeah.
watching this group of bereaved people go, when can we play? And you're like, and actually, to be fair, our year one was quite playful, to be fair, on the school, but when can we play is a phrase from that age group. And you kind of find for most adults, you know, the natural pattern of life is you go through a period of time where you're not as connected to play unless you're in an environment of that until you become a grandparent. And I was just thinking about my parents as grandparents reconnecting with play and being able to do that really, really well and doing play. And yes, I'll dress up with you, or let's sit on the floor and have pretend tea parties or whatever. And it's almost like, is there something perhaps in that stage of life where you reminisce for that and you think, this is really, like, subconsciously, I want to reconnect with that phase of my life. And
or maybe you feel like it's okay. There's a reason for it. Because I think when you've got children, I was thinking about that, particularly with little children, there's almost, although you might not always want to, and sometimes you probably wish you didn't have to play, there's permission, isn't there? Like I was thinking the other day how I've been ice skating with our kids, and I've been, you know, we've been to climbing centre, you know, we've done all sorts of things that I would never do on my own as an adult. It would feel a bit strange to go even ice skating on my own. Oh, I just fancy ice skating, so I'm going to go. So there's, maybe I should do that. But actually, there's something about you don't feel bad because actually I'm doing it with my kids. And then I suppose there's that period where there's not that. And then if you're become a grandparent, I guess you get that sort of permission again.
And you've got the hindsight of thinking you've had that period of time where you've prioritised tasks such a lot, and most people's regrets later in life is I didn't spend enough time doing these things, and perhaps it's another chance to do it where you aren't thinking like often mums and dads are, I've got the dinner to make, I've got this to do, I've got an email to send, and you're sort of playing and thinking about rushing on, unless you're a really good parent. That often is going on in your head. Not good, you know, I don't mean it like that. But grandparents maybe have that benefit of, I can just do this and we can have an ending. I'm not needing to rush on. I can give you my full time, and they've got that benefit of a little bit of regret of their own, probably, that they were sometimes preoccupied.
Yeah. I mean, just when I think of it as well, I think about one of the things that I can really struggle with is wanting to be perfect. And so even, you know, as a mom, and my daughters are all teenagers, but you know, when they were little, I wanted to be making sure that they were, you know, well-mannered and kind and loving one another. And all of those different things were always at play when we were playing. And so I was half, you know, playing, but also half thinking, how do I kind of teach them this well? And so there's two tracks of thinking. It's quite exhausting sometimes. I wonder if grandparents also just, they don't really care about that so much. I mean, I don't mean they don't care whether their
but that's not their role.
They just don't need to think about
job.
So actually the enjoyment and the wonder of having grandchildren in their lives is perhaps just really, really different. And I wonder sometimes whether, you know, if we step back a bit and think, oh, actually maybe I can just sit down here and just think through this child's eyes and actually enjoy the wonder of what they're looking at or playing with. It's a very different experience from, oh, are they going to be safe? And, you know, all of the things that can be rattling through our minds. And that sounds very idealistic. So I'm not sure how easy it is, but just to even think about those moments of where's the wonder in this? You know, can we just experience it in a different way?
In a different way. I'm just thinking about a lot of the people I work with and a lot of the people who'll be listening. Some of the biggest challenges for them is just the amount of stuff they've got on their mind. They're in that very pressured period of life. They also have probably got some tough stuff going on that can make you feel a bit sad or rubbish or disappointed. And this idea of perfectionism is something that I think a lot of people suffer from, and wanting to do everything really well. Do you think that play is an antidote for some of that stuff, and having playfulness in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit before, Emma, but I was just reading something that was saying, you know, it's instinctual. That is how children and babies, well, that's how babies learn, through play. So it's a part of who we are. So I think if you shut off that part of who you are, which I guess we do gradually. I think, you know, again, I was listening to something, you've probably come across it, Hannah, from education, that it's Sir Ken Robinson. He was doing a TED talk about, I think it's even called, does Do Schools Kill Creativity? I think that's the title.
Yeah.
But that, actually that does happen gradually, doesn't it, in school, that there's less play, like you were saying, in those early years. It is very much about play, and gradually that changes. And so, I think, like you said, with those little children, there's something in us that needs that kind of space for playfulness, but in the broad sense of like creativity, exploration. And so if we shut that bit of us off, like it's part of our well-being to need that space. And I think probably what we need to do as adults then is rediscover that for joy. Like that's one of the big things I was thinking. I was thinking about, well, what comes from play? It's joy, isn't it? It's an enjoyment, it's pleasure, it's for its own sake. But actually, as you find a little bit of joy through something little bit playful, just giving, even if it's 10-15 minutes to something that you enjoy doing, a lot of the research says that impacts the whole of your life. So where you might be feeling stuck or kind of finding a particular area of your life difficult, whether that's relational or at work, or actually if you can find a moment in your day or your week to do something that brings you joy, that is playful, creative, doesn't have a goal or an outcome or have to be perfect, but is actually a chance to make mistakes and fail without there being a problem, then that can impact the rest of your life. In fact, there was a story, it might have even been in Stuart Brown's book, about a CEO who was had been a CEO of this company for years and years and years, and she was feeling like, I don't know, do I want, I am okay, like I'm satisfied, like, but there must be more, like I want to fight, I've lost some kind of joy in all areas of my life. And so it was Stuart Brown's book, because he started to describe how she looked back at a sort of play history of like what she enjoyed doing when she was younger. And she realised one of the times when she most found joy and pleasure was when she was riding horses. And so she decided just to go and do that again. And she said just by literally doing that, she changed how she felt about her work and actually her marriage. She was like, I just was a more joyful person. And it wasn't a big thing she did. She just changed something small.
It's a really interesting point around, re-engaging with something that you used to do can be a really good thing, something you did when you were younger. I know we've talked about this before around, one of the things that sends for my own story, like my own experiences, I've used to be part of a pretty good orchestra. We were like a regional orchestra, and we, play in competitions sometimes, or just even have concerts. And sometimes when I go somewhere where there's an orchestra and you hear them tune up, I get this like rush in my body, which takes me back. It's like one of those things that takes you back to a moment, and thinking, I remember sitting there and feeling those nerves of just the excitement of playing with others, which is like a little bit of me that probably doesn't get a lot of adult time. And we've talked about art and how you would art for the art's sake, and how sometimes when it turns into art for outcome, or then even like music for exams, or there's anything wrong with doing those things, but it can kill it. And even just think about the horse riding or running or anything, one of our tendencies as adults, and there is again nothing wrong with having a goal like I'm going to run a marathon or whatever, but it can completely take the play out of something. I've got a friend who runs, and she's a doctor, and she's talked to me quite honestly about her journey with it, that it became this thing that she became quite obsessive about, and timing, and how much she was going to do, and how good she was going to get, and actually added into a bit of a disorder essentially about the way she saw her body. And it was another sort of thing to do and achieve. And she has a rule now that she does this certain loop. She never times herself. She never takes a watch. She never deviates. She doesn't allow herself, unless she was just going to go off for the sake. She doesn't allow herself to check how long she's been, to turn it into something that she knows her brain has the potential for. And I think we are so used to turning what we do into monetizing or achievement focus, or look what I've got to show for it. And we do it to our children, and we don't even mean to. I think that I wonder whether this woman talking about horse riding, in many ways the worst thing she could do in a way is to turn that into now I'm going to try and become a competitive horse rider. Again, there's anything wrong with those things per se, but it just adds into this, it's only worth it if I do that. And so for this friend who runs, she said it's like an act of resistance that I will not. And actually my new daughter-in-law to be is an incredible runner. Like, she's naturally unbelievably fast. She could probably be professional if she wanted to be. She's that good. But she won't, because for her it is something that she will not let it. She doesn't ever track. The only reason we know she's so good is because she was the running leg of a triathlon, and she did it in this like shockingly good 5K.
My children always talk about how
Yeah.
fast she is.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing.
She's really,
very
everyone.
impressed about.
The children in the family.
Yeah.
Lizzie's children are my children's cousins, so they're like, Emily can run like at the speed of light.
Yeah.
But I know she doesn't want to turn it into that much. Noah's like, you could be in the Olympics, and he wants to set her up with a plan and have her doing a triathlon and being the next, what's her name, Georgia, somebody Taylor Brown is that made it. Anyway, I've just made a name up there. He wants that. No, he doesn't really. He understands. But for her, it's so important that it doesn't take that place in her life. And I wonder how often, we sitting around this table or people listening, we get caught into the trap of, I need to goal this, I need to maximise this, I need to leverage this or make it a thing that I can say, look what I did, which can kill it.
Yeah. Do you think that goes back to something you said before about the guilt or the feeling? And again, what I was saying about when you're a parent or you're a grandparent, there's permission because there's children in front of you, and so therefore it's important to play with them because they need play. But no, actually, we need it.
Yeah.
Like it's part of who we all are.
Absolutely.
And we need it as children and adults. And so rather than feeling guilty or feeling like it's a waste of our time, so we have to justify it by goals and targets and things, actually realising, and I guess this goes back to your initial question of like what do people think about play and like how do they react? I guess realising why it's so important for all of us to make space for that playfulness in who we are and playfulness in our life, because actually we need it. It's important for all of us.
Tell me a bit more about this need. Tell me what some of the evidence says about physically, mentally, like if I need vitamin C, I need vitamin D, I need to exercise my body even if it's just walking. What does this need for play look like? What does a full, how does it, what is the data or some of the science around that? Tell me.
They're learning all the time, and brain science is quite new.
Yeah.
But when you look at neurology, when you play, loads of parts of the brain light up, and so there's different neural connections being made. So, for example, when someone's in the kind of fight, flight, freeze state, there's a kind of difference between that where you're not really using your prefrontal cortex and you're not really being able to emotionally reason. You're just needing to be safe and get out or fight or whatever it is so that you can be safe. But when we play, we are using all sorts of different regions of the brain, and so there's an integration of the brain in that sense. And so when we get into a period of life where we get a bit stuck with lots of different things going on, and we've got to do this and we've got to do that, and we're feeling that sense of I need to be perfect or whatever, the likelihood is our brain isn't in that sense integrating very well. We're perhaps stuck in a bit fight, flight, freeze state quite often. We're going there. Our nervous system is dysregulated. And play is a way of actually us being able to return to that regulated state, and using things like the prefrontal cortex, where actually there's emotional reasoning. That's where we are able to learn, where our brain obviously can create and kind of do all sorts of things, and we learn how we can kind of get through and problem solve. So the really amazing thing about play is we really, really need it, because it's something that in one sense, if we're stuck in that state of fight, flight, freeze too often, we're dysregulated too often, we aren't able to emotionally reason, we aren't able to think about, well, what could I do differently? How could I take a creative approach? How could I problem solve? How could I verbalise
We can't get there.
What I really need or what needs to happen? So play is incredibly important. And I personally, I have kind of a high sense of responsibility, and like I say, I can quite easily go into I need to be perfect. And so for me, when I think about then actually I need to think about play in my life, it's trying to kind of use the logic of this is a responsible thing to do, which sounds a bit weird because it's kind of, well, it's kind of not the point, but actually it helps me to think, no, this is actually a super important and vital thing for me in terms of my work, in terms of my parenting, in terms of my just life, in how I actually help others and do all the things that I need to do. So that's one way I can kind of put the lens of, no, it's me being responsible by playing. I am actually being responsible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's good.
I was thinking when you're saying that, how I remember going into, it's called Capital One. Is it a bank?
Yeah.
Bank?
Oh,
Yeah, it's quite a major company,
Yeah.
isn't it? But there's a base for it in Nottingham. And I remember going on a school trip with some year fours when I was a teaching assistant for a while. And there's all these desks and, as you'd expect. And then they had breakout play spaces.
Oh,
Did
I
they?
love
And
that.
they actually
That's
and they had like a room where it was set up like winter, so you could like throw snowballs and all that. And I was like, what is this?
What is this?
And I think at the time, obviously, I hadn't been doing play therapy training. I hadn't read lots of things about play, but I think they're really interesting actually. And lots of companies
I was
do
gonna
that
say
now,
about
like
some company
recognise that
examples.
actually they need to bring in space where people can be playful for the sake of it. Not because they're going to, at the end of it, have achieved something, but because actually when we play, it unlocks, we're using different senses, aren't we, when we play? So we might be moving our body or there might sounds, smells, whatever. It's multi-sensory. And so actually that unlocks all sorts of different parts of your brain. There's different connections being made. And actually in doing that, then that kind of unlocks creativity and flexibility and problem solving that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So they found, I think, that actually having those spaces means that their employees are more, their work is more
Innovative
productive.
and more innovative.
They can solve problems, they can work
absolutely.
together better and things like that.
So I'd be really interested as well, like I know you've both worked with children, obviously that's the main and plan of what you do with your therapy. We're talking about it for adults, but obviously you've used play as therapy. So can you explain just, a little bit about how play is therapeutic and why, arguably, potentially it could be therapeutic for adults, but what you've seen play unlock for children? Because obviously there'll be people listening who maybe don't even really understand how play therapy works. What is it that happens when children, I know a bit about this because I know from both of you and I used to be a teacher, so I've obviously had that kind of experience, but for many people listening, I have no idea if a child has play therapy, what does that look like and why does it work? How is it therapeutic as well as being, this is important, children should play and adults should play it's good for us, but how is it therapeutic?
Well, a couple of things, like one I was thinking, so I currently work with children where there's been loss, so bereavement.
They've lost a sibling.
Yeah, and that's obviously incredibly sad and a really hard time, and that's really sad for the whole family. So to have a space where there's time, like we said, to play, where there's just a little bit of joy, that's really important for them. But also I think, like, for processing trauma and difficult things, like Emma was saying about kind of how your brain works when you're doing that and when you're in fight, flight, freeze. Actually, play gives you a safe context to explore something that's been really hard. So whether that's like drawing that, you might not be drawing that experience, but using metaphor. So using story either through drawing or through, like, sometimes we use sand, so using figures and symbols within sand, or it might be using role play. But actually what you're doing is you're not talking about yourself. No. You're telling a story through the character, and so that's like emotionally safe. And children don't need to be told that. They just naturally seem to get that. So they will often play out what's been going on.
Is it fascinating to watch happen sometimes and you think, crumbs,
really
how did that just come
and
out of the play?
And they can, through that, they explore new possibility, if it's like a different outcome maybe, or what might that have felt like, and I think when I first started it, I thought, probably even like lots of people when they hear you say play therapy, I still had this feeling of like, what, all I'm doing is playing and I'm getting paid to do that, like really? But actually, as you journey with a child as well, because it's not just one session, you have many over weeks, you begin to see patterns in their play and what they're processing. And it is amazing, actually, how powerful it is just to, a lot of the time it's not even, we don't direct them, we allow them a space to play. Yeah. And we work alongside them, play with them and explore within the metaphor that they're using, it's amazing what comes out, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it can be incredibly powerful to watch someone on a journey where they're using something to explore their world, but in a way that they can show you things that they wouldn't be able to verbalise. And that might be because of their age, that might be because they don't have the language yet, but it might just be because they just don't know how to say this is going on, or I'm feeling like this, but actually in a sand tray can kind of express something of what is going on, and that's incredibly powerful. But also, like you said, that they can explore new possibilities and kind of try and make meaning of things that perhaps they weren't able to before. I remember a friend, actually, it wasn't play therapy, but effectively she was using play. Her child during COVID was very young, I think she was 3, and she started getting all these kind of little happy land figures and stuff like that, and they were all in their different houses, and she kept playing out this thing where all the different houses had different people in, and some were ill and some were in, not able to leave their house, and etc., and she just kept doing this every day. And over time then different things happened, and effectively my curiosity would kind of say, well, I wonder if she is using it to make sense of the craziness of the world, and in it find some meaning and find actually, okay, this is what's going on. How might things change? What could happen? What might be good? What might not be good? In a world that, A, she couldn't understand, and B, she didn't have the language for. And over time, she then, different things that were good happened in that little world. Which is so powerful.
That makes me think of my kids during COVID, and we were watching some little video clips recently. They created, so my eldest, Ruben, I think he must have been 6 or 7, and he created something called the Kid Kingdom, and it was exactly the same thing. Like, actually, when I look back on it now, maybe I was kind of in his there was so much conversation about him he was the king of the Kid Kingdom, and Ezra, his younger brother, was the Lord, and there were ambulances and doctors like in the grown-up world, but really what he was doing was trying to make sense of like the world around him, and there's a grown-up, someone in charge, and these things happen, and it was the same kind of thing. And I think particularly then that was so important because life was so different.
And he had agency. He was able to be the leader of this world, and potentially like I have some control here where I don't have control elsewhere. I'm not.
Absolutely.
There's so many facets to it. It's really fascinating.
So, can play be therapeutic for adults then?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I guess in the same way. I mean, I've the same way as things you've been saying there, Emma, about children, the same can be true, because I think if we get stuck, then actually doing something that allows us to explore creatively and metaphorically what's going on for us can be really helpful. So I found that we had a daughter really early, like she was born at 25 weeks, and I think one of the things that happened for me was I probably didn't have, after I'd had her, there was a lot of playfulness or creativity in my life. There was a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and so I've had to kind of find my way back to that in some ways. But I'm now working with families where there has been baby loss, so a similar-ish experience. And I've noticed even with the adults that actually when I do some work sometimes with the parents and I offer them, we can sit and talk, that's one thing, but actually it unlocks something different when I say, do you know what, why don't you use my sand today, and we put the sand tray out and I let them explore with the figures, and it's amazing what comes out, something entirely different than would have from just talking. And the same with art, and again, it's not create a nice piece of artwork, it's just have a piece of paper, rather than tell me, why don't you draw it, draw what's in your head, and something entirely different comes out. So I think, definitely adults it's a way of becoming unstuck from whatever by being using something creative and playful and play, because you too can then play around with new possibilities. And all the science would say that that's like really important, like for adults, like just as much as for children.
More than we realise.
Yeah, way more than we realise. But it's in fact, I think it was Stuart Brown again, because he's brilliant, like saying, actually, play saved him, and that it's essential. Like they don't just say it's a nice add-on. Like they actually say, it is essential. For us, like for our survival. If you remove all the things, if you think of all the sort of playfulness and creativity in the world, if you remove that, what do we have? Like a pretty, you'd remove art. In fact, he even says you'd get rid of flirting, like the playfulness with language. All sorts of things would go. The theatres, like everything that's
potentially one of the things that we're removing by sort of sending everything to AI.
Yeah.
Is that actually a lot of creativity is being, we can replace it, we can outsource it, and we think, we're time saving. But what if that is part of a big problem around?
It's terrifying.
It's
really,
terrifying to think where that could go.
Absolutely.
If you could get AI to just do a concerto in the style of, and they create another one. That's terrifying to think that process of what's actually good for us as humans, because we become so obsessed with efficiency, that we lose the nuance of the imperfectness of a human version. I mean, that's just a thought as we're talking.
Yikes.
I know, it's a scary one. I mean, I'll go on.
I was just going to say, like, it's a devaluing of process, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to that
So
Ken
true.
Robinson talk where he says, we educate, you can't see if you're listening, but from the mind, like the head, that's the education system. It's not about kind of the lower part, like movement and kind of
the process.
And I guess that ties in with that idea of process, because it's what do we value? And I suppose like what we're saying is we value efficiency and the mind and thinking, and but not creativity and problem solving and innovative, adaptability,
and yet
there's removing all that.
It's this bizarre thing of us desperately prioritising efficiency in the way we think and the way we live a lot of our lives, and we have this desire to build in some processes into our life which are the slow versions, like the fact that loads of people like to do things like sourdough, which is not efficient, and it isn't. It's about a slow process, and or doing coffee properly, or all those things are like this desiriness to let's actually do this properly. And yet there's another part of us which is like, let's just, rinse the most efficiency out of our life as we can, which I know I can be so guilty of doing.
And it's not necessarily bad in some circumstances, but I think it's really good to take a step back and think, actually, what are the things I really take pleasure in? What are the things that actually I find joy in? And where do I potentially want them to then be the most efficient version of themselves, and why? Because actually we do strip the joy, and so actually for me, and it's one I'm really learning, I have to say I'm on a process that's probably going to last a lifetime, but for me art became very much about, this is the mark, you've missed the mark, and I didn't do very well in my A-level, and I was supposed to, and I missed being able to go to the university I wanted to, and art became this like I'm not good at it, and I missed the mark. And my kind of, when I started play therapy training, I had to just create and enjoy, and it wasn't going to ever be marked. It was just about being in the process,
like the running without the timer.
Absolutely. And you can just use whatever you want and make whatever you want, and no one's going to think anything of it particularly. It's just about the process of what's going on as you do it. How are you feeling? And I freaked out, and actually, but over the kind of few, how do I, again, I lost track of time, so it might have been 45 minutes, it might have been now, I don't know, but doing this kind of process of just creating, I realised I love this, and I was just kind of dabbing with a paintbrush and going all over the place, and that for me was just a joyful experience that lit up the brain, that and we haven't talked about this, but there's loads of chemicals that are released when we play
maybe that too
maybe absolutely, but in terms of oxytocin, the feel good hormones that allow us to kind of effectively be rid of more anxiety and anxious thoughts and actually find joy, they were there. Why would we want to strip those things and become just efficient? Of course we need efficiency in some things, but let's think about the things we really love and not let them just become efficient.
Really good. We're going to do a part 2 where we're going to talk a little bit about play personalities and a bit more around what people can practically do, but just as a final point, one of the things I talk about a lot in my podcast, if you ever listen or you read my books, it's all about like tweaks. It's about what can we do a little bit, you know, if we're struggling and we're like, oh. The last thing I want people to do is to feel a burden. I've now got to find time to play. And everything else I've got to do great. Now Hannah says we've got to play. I've got to do this, I've got to do that. I've got to move my body. I've got to take vitamins. I've got to sleep properly. I've got to do my work efficiently. I've got to connect with my children and my family and my parents. And now I've got to play. But we can do micro moments, or you know, if somebody's listening in that state of mind, but they are actually longing to do a bit of play, can you give us any parameters, any thoughts, any little ideas you've got around what that could look like to start integrating it in your life? Any thoughts, Lizzie or Emma? And we'll leave people with that like practical.
Can
thoughts.
I say read a book, or is that like adding an extra thing?
No, say it, because they can
not
listen
read
to
a
it.
book. That would be a brilliant thing to do. But some of the books that we have both read, actually,
and we'll put these in the show notes for people,
are brilliant for just giving. I think because there's loads of ideas in there that are little things you could do that are everyday, could bring playfulness into everyday moments. So one of the really good books I think that anyone could read, you know, is a really easy read, is Michael Rosen's book, The Book of Play, because I think, first of all, it will help you to go, yeah, play is, a lot of what we've said, like play is really important for me. But then also all the way through, he puts little activities, doesn't he? Little suggestions, which I think are really fun.
Like what?
So one of them that I tried with my kids the other day, it didn't go very well, was, you know, doing the, is it called Just a Minute off the radio? Like coming up with your own categories in a jar on the table. And over dinner, just everyone pulling one out and having to talk for a minute on a topic without deviation, whatever else it is.
Interesting.
Because you're just playing, you know, or playing with words. So I think he said something like, come up with a word. Like when you're out one day, just look at like two signs and put the, you know, a word from one and a word from another together.
I made up a word yesterday. Dog mint.
That's a brilliant word.
Yeah. All the things you have to do with owning a dog.
Yeah.
It's not that clever.
Dog mint. Exactly. And then
Catmin.
well, he says
you
do
can have
that
catmin.
and then get someone else to come up with the definition for the word,
Yeah.
or in fact play with it in your head.
Just a little bit of
little
like
playfulness. Or even, Emma, go on. I was going to say even daydreaming. Actually, that's an interesting way to play. Like actually just giving yourself maybe each day just a little moment where, and I'm telling myself this because actually I would normally feel quiet, as I'm sure we all do, with tasks or my phone messages. You know, there's constantly something, but actually giving yourself a moment each day to sort of daydream. Not do that, be bored, stand in the queue and just allow your play in your mind, because that's something we can all do, isn't it?
Have you got a suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, this is very personal to me, so it might not be the thing, but when I cook, what I tried to do this week in just thinking about this was I put on Joy by Ray, and I just danced as I cooked. And it was really interesting because, I mean, I just like moving my body. But, you know, again, that sort of sense of feeling a bit self-conscious when you dance, when you're around people. But I was just, you know,
do what you
having
like
a
when
little
you're
shimmy
on your own,
and all sorts. And
if there were cameras in here, I'm telling you now, there'd be some embarrassing pictures of me in this kitchen.
absolutely. But isn't that great?
There are cameras in here.
There are now. We could have
For
a little
this
shimmy.
day
But the thing about it is that actually, as I was cooking and kind of singing my heart out and having a dance, when I called dinner and everyone came to the table, they were like, Mom, what's happened to you? What's happened in your day? You're in a really good mood. And I was like, I don't know that my day's been particularly great. But that kind of 5 minutes of just letting myself go. I was doing a task. I was cooking up for the family. I needed to cook, but
Playfully.
where can you add a little bit of fun?
And can I just add a quick thought to that? I read a book called Burnout a couple of years ago by two women called, two sisters with the surname Nagoski. I can't remember their first names, Emily, I think, and somebody else. But one of the best bits in the book is an explanation of the stress cycle and how in historic times you'd have a stress, which might be like a wild animal coming, and you'd, you know, that kind of idea of a immediate stress. The animal would be killed, or you'd get away, or you'd run away, and then the stress would be over. And they're explaining how in modern life we've got smaller stresses but constant stresses. And so your brain and your body's going through that process, that fight-flight process all the time, and we aren't closing it off. And what she talks about in the book is that there are certain things you can do which close the loop. And what you did, dancing in the kitchen, because moving your body out or singing, and both, is one of those. Doing something playful, singing, gargling, making your vagus nerve go. Crying is another thing that can close the stress cycle. But I found that very interesting to learn, because I remember one time being really in a hurry and in a massive traffic jam, and I couldn't get out of it, and I could feel myself in this stress cycle. And I did similarly. I just put the radio on and sang along really loudly and thought to myself, this is going to help me close the stress cycle. And so that felt really, really good, and like I got a bit of agency back, and understanding like neurologically what was going on in my body was a really good thing. That sleep is another one, or hugging someone, it's got to be longer than 8 seconds or something, and it releases those oxytocin. So it's all about that happening. So that's another good book that covers that really, really well. Even though it's not about play, it is saying about playful things or important things that help save us and why it's vital.
It's interesting that a lot of the things that are play are using the things that are the closing the stress cycle.
Exactly.
Singing or breath.
Moving,
we're doing
dancing,
those things through all the things that are playful, aren't they? Which is really important.
For sure. So we're going to close this episode, and we're going to carry on this conversation. If you want to learn more, there's going to be a part 2. We're going to look a little bit at play personalities and a little bit more of what we can do in our everyday lives. Thank you so much, Emma and Lizzie.
Did you forget my name?
She was playing with it.
I'm going to call you